Good morning. I'm the Complex Games apologist, and we must confront now the Pantheon of Hârn. Those gods which have been more real to me, which have preoccupied my imagination, and of whose rage and whose blessings I have been visited by nightmares, because there's a certain reality to the Pantheon of Hârn, to the churches of Hârn, to the way that they act upon their world. They're like the medieval Catholic Church in that they're organized, they're bureaucratic, they're real, they're on the ground. There's a lot of discussion of the actual rituals. And the other thing is that they exist upon the spiritual fabric that was there in Hârn before these churches arrived. That is, except Elvir, who's been worshipped here for a long time, and Siem, the Lord of Dreams, who is the god held in highest by the elves and the dwarves that abide in Hârn. So those other members of the Pantheon, what is it about them that has gotten to the point where they've been hard to get out of my mind as the game master, and where I've been able to kind of get that subtle feeling of miracles, of events, and an understanding of when the will of a god is manifest, and what it means for one of their followers to be faithful to them, and how they are judged eternally. Of course, it's a fantasy, and that's the beautiful thing here, is that it's an alternate reality. It's outside of our experience, and yet it feels very real. I could talk encyclopedically, and I will eventually in other videos about each of these churches, but for now, Elvir, the creator of the fatherless multitude who dwells here in Hârn, the original god of the Jaren people that first settled the subcontinent, he is said to actually lurk beneath the blasted plain of Araka Kalai on the shores of Lake Banath, where he creates his servants and his creations, the Ivashu, which are the monsters of Hârn. They are the source of the fantastic and strange creatures that populate a monster manual. And they hide in the dark places, and because they do not reproduce unto themselves, but always sojourn from Lake Banath, there's a throttle on how many of them there are. So, at first glance, this interesting and almost Lovecraftian horror to Elvir was something that brought me in. And then I had to understand why anyone would be worshipping him. Well, of course, if he is the creator of these strange creatures, and if there is a powerful force that lords over this beautiful and vast continent, and you are the people settling it, then you would give worship to that which is worthy. And what would that worship take the form of? Well, the interesting thing is that if you have people that are retired into a state of prayer, they also get the time to be practitioners of art. And in the case of the priests and the monks of Elvir, long ago, they started developing the Lakis script, the unique language that is Hârn, that is native to this land. And it's the fabric that ties together the eastern and the western halves of Hârn, is this written language. Unlike medieval Britain, unlike other places, there is no carpetbagging Latin. The Lakis script, in which the chronicles of your party's adventures will be written in, is native to this land. They use this as their bread of life, because Elvir has fallen out of favor because more personal religions have come along. But they still have their high houses of worship, and they still have their cloisters, and they're vending the service as scribes, illuminating tomes and exalting the ancestors of noble clans, and legitimating the claims to the throne and the earldom by mythologizing the Hârnic past. And I think it should be noted that this is one of those interesting points of fantasy, that this almost Lovecraftian god has taken on an innocuous role, and that while the rituals of his worship assuredly involve snakes, nudity, and weirdness, his priests are thought of as something to be overlooked, that they are a great person to hire if you need some graphic design done. And if you are a creative person, if you enjoy the natural beauty of Hârn, when you look out at the waterfalls and the mountains, maybe you are drawn to pray to him. Maybe you are drawn to learn the secrets of his worship. But it's more likely that you were born into the faith of one of the more personal gods. Now let's talk about the two goddesses of Lawrani and Peony, whose worship has come from the continent, born by organized missionaries, like St. Patrick, you could say. And oh, isn't it interesting St. Patrick cast the snakes out of Ireland? And isn't it interesting how green and verdant and misty Hârn is? Well, history rhymes. Well, who are these two ladies? Peony is the eldest, they say, of the gods of the Concordant. And she is the protector of the weak. Her order, the balm of joy, runs hospitals where the succor of the disabled and the elderly is found. They are always on the verge of bankruptcy. There is always debate within her ranks about how much wealth the church should hold and how much charity it should hurriedly disburse. And they are the moral conscience, or they seek to be, of the feudal order, because Lawrani is like Athena. She is a goddess that is a warrior. She says it is noble to protect the weak, and it is good to arm yourself, to be prepared for war, and that the resources of the small folk are nobly allocated to create these warriors, to defend the realms of men. Now, of course, in Hârn, the civilized realms are surrounded by barbarians, and it is not so many centuries ago that there were real earnest threats to their survival. And it's true that the Church of Lawrani came along and created her militant orders and helped cultivate the craft of mounted knighthood around the time that the kingdoms of Hârn finally gained their footing. They finally stopped wobbling in the barbarian threat. So maybe there's something to be said for that. It could be said that her church is finding its place in society by being the legitimator of the feudal order. Knighthood and everything incumbent in that idea of noblesse oblige is found within the pages of her theology. And her priests dispense this as the word of God at monthly services. So if you are a noble and you enjoy your lifestyle, if you know that the banners may be called and you want good fortune in battle as you protect your lands and your folk, and you want your feudal overlord to treat you well, then you probably are attending these services. And when you're in that stone edifice that is invested of a lot of wealth and took a lot of building to make it happen, and there's all this stained glass light shining upon you as, say, a manorial knight, your baron, and maybe even the king, and you're sitting together, and Lawrani's justice is equal, even though the offices invested in each of you create a hierarchy. And maybe your sons and daughters might, if they don't have prospects here in the lay realm join the orders of her priesthood. There are darker, more hidden churches, but first, let's think about the Church of Saavik Nor, called an arrogant intellectual by some. I think that we know now that this is not only an interesting god that would be attractive to players, but it is one that holds its own mystery. Saavik Nor is ultimately the keeper and the cultivator of esoteric knowledge. Secrets are something to be lauded, to be kept, to be shared, and to be used as currency, according to Saavik Nor. His monks and his temples, the harlequins and jesters and actors that ply the realms, are the keepers of the keys to any advancement or backtracking in the technology. He is the keeper of the illimitable tome, that covenant which keeps the gods from destroying the world, struggling against each other. It would be easy, and I think in the past we have dismissed gods like this as unimportant to the fabric of a world. Their dispassion is something which means that they're going to be at a remove, that no character would want to be part of that order. But now that we have the model of the maesters of Westeros, I think we can reject that notion. And indeed, the Saavik Nor do vend their services as tutors and as engineers and as scribes and learned men to the dignitaries of Hârn. It would be a good thing, and indeed it is done, to keep one of the higher anointed of Saavik Nor in your court if you are a king. He will have secret knowledges. Next time we'll talk about the hidden gods, the darker gods, and of course one that is very uncloseted, a Grick, Lord of Fire, 888 demons, the octagonal pit, served by Pamashelu the Insatiable. Oh goodness, it's not going to be pretty. But for now, think about how captivating these temples are. Think about how they need real wealth to survive, and so they hold estates. There are serfs that plow the fields just to bring bread to the table for these churches. And that those estates that they hold are powerful enough that the king needs to consider wisely when he does things, because these churches can bring down a world of hurt. They have wealth and power coming in from the continent. They have one of the few conduits of information and of advancement. That's why these temples of these gods are built to a higher standard than almost anything else in Hârn. It's because they've imported that knowledge. Isn't it getting interesting how these churches really aren't pasted? They're not pastiche, they're not cartoons. I hope that it's beginning to contrast with the experience that you had in other settings, in that religion is something that calls to the people of Hârn, as I think it will call to your players' characters. And maybe, like me, you will find yourself understanding this alternate theology, this alternate reality. I'm the Complex Games apologist, and this has been an otherworldly journey.
We long for a parent to care for us, to forgive us our errors, to save us from our childish mistakes. But knowledge is preferable to ignorance. Better by far to embrace the hard truth than a reassuring fable. If we crave some cosmic purpose, then let us find ourselves a worthy goal.